Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Mentors Musings podcast. I'm Sarah Hall, and I'm here with my mentor, Abraham Snell. And this is episode 4 of the podcast overall, but episode 3 of our discussion about the tilt profiles. First, we started talking about tilt from a more theoretical perspective. Then we transitioned into tilt from a personal perspective and getting to know oneself. And in this episode, we'd like to talk more about knowing others and how we can better get to know each other so that we can work more, I guess, fruitfully together. And we'd like to talk about this in the context of others' actions or habits that make things difficult for us to work with them and then also easy for us to work with them. And we'll also talk about how we kind of deal with different folks' personalities. And the more we get to know people, the better we'll be able to manage our interactions with them, whether that be, dealing with their quirks or advocating for ourselves, or maybe just kind of singing their praises. There's all different kinds of ways to, handle those different interactions. And we want to just dive deeper into what's worked for us in the past.
Yeah.
So,
One thing I want to say on that before
sure.
we kind of jump into our questions is, there's this saying, when people tell you who they are, believe them. And a lot of times that has kind of a negative tilt to it, but that's also a positive tilt. So we tend to radiate who we are. And so I think as humans, which I say a lot, we should be listening for those cues or watching for those cues, because most of what's going to be communicated will be through actions. And so people are communicating at some level who they are. Not all the time, but most of the time. Sometimes, like, for instance, in a dating relationship or in an interview situation, we send our representative, right? Because we want our best foot forward. But most of the time, we are being who we are. And so that is, and we're communicating that. And that's not a negative. I think it's a positive, especially if you want to be able to work better with people. Just wanted to say that.
Sure, sure. I think it just kind of brings to light the importance of transparency. Um,
Yeah.
all right, so let's get started with the actions and habits that make things difficult for us at work. So, Abraham, I'll let you go first on this one.
Okay. So, two actions or habits that make things difficult for me. One is when people don't take responsibility or they blame others for something that it's clearly their situation. So here's the thing with me, and I even do this with my children, is it's not so much the thing. We make mistakes. We don't get things done. Whatever the thing is, we're not perfection. But it doesn't really, to me, this is strictly from my psyche. It doesn't take a whole lot to say, "Oh yeah, that's on me, my bad," yeah, or whatever. Just take responsibility. It seems to me that it takes more work to blame or to deny or to try to get out of, or sometimes to just be dishonest about something, when you can take responsibility for it, figure out how to make it right, move forward. So that's one thing. The second thing um, is what I'm going to use this term, backdooring. um, Backdooring an issue is like, a coworker or, someone has an issue with you, and maybe the issue is valid, but they never tell you the issue. They backdoor it. They go to your manager or they go to teammates or some other people, and it kind of becomes gossip. And you hear it second or third hand. Um, that just really bothers me, because what happens to me, and again, this is a lot of these quirks are personal, but for me, I lose trust. If you have an issue with me and you just tell me face to face, we are spot on. Let's rock and roll. Yeah, I heard you. I'll agree or disagree based on, whatever the situation is. But ultimately, I have huge respect for somebody that just comes and says, "Hey, this is my issue," versus telling everybody else or going to your manager when they haven't talked to you, so forth and so on. So those are my two issues.
Sure, sure. And so just kind of bringing the conversation together here, with working with others, um, how do you deal with those things? What are some of the things that you do? Whether that's with yourself, kind of in your conversations with yourself or in your conversations with those other individuals, to make things right.
So some of the ways I deal with it are really kind of the ways I deal with a lot of the maybe negative things that happen at work or in your personal life. Again, as we said in the last episode, this stuff translates, right? Um, so one thing is empathy. I think we can all lead with empathy. Um, Empathy allows us to reset our expectations. It allows us to edit the story that we tell ourselves. We all tell ourselves a story about situations, whether we are making judgments about one of our coworkers or another person, or whether we are making judgments about ourselves. Empathy, if we lead with empathy, it allows us to take into account the experience, the lens of the other person. So that's one way. Having a solution oriented mentality, and this is something just being transparent that I work on because I need to work on it a lot, rather than just being negative and just continuing to wallow in the issue. What are some solutions? How can we move past this? How can we move forward? How can we get beyond this? And then I think the last thing, and again, all of these are general that can be used. It's not like these specific things that I'm sharing, but in general, um, these are things that I think you can apply to these situations, especially situations when something gets on your nerves. I mean, when you really think that an issue is just wrong, you have to have these tools or you will become really negative about a person or a situation. So empathy, being solution oriented, and the final thing I would say is compromise, figuring out what's the compromise here. How can we both get a little bit of something that we want, whether it's just peace of mind or satisfaction, um, but at the same time, we are able to move forward and continue to work together. So empathy, being solution oriented, and reaching compromises.
Yeah, I really appreciate the point that you make about being solution oriented because I think it highlights the importance of when, you're trying to troubleshoot, not necessarily taking things too personally. And I don't necessarily mean like dissociating completely and not, acknowledging when something has, maybe rubbed you the wrong way personally, but um just kind of putting things into a broader perspective of, what's the best solution rather than, how do I feel about this? I think that's a good way of going about things.
Yeah.
Both considering what your own personal needs, but then also putting it into a broader kind of
Yeah.
viewpoint.
So you got me hanging out here, Sarah, telling all my business. So what are some things that irk you?
Sure, sure. So, I would say one thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way would be a lack of communication around time goals. So I don't necessarily mind if, I understand that things come up, right? Uh, Things get in the way, everybody's busy and everybody's got things going on. But when it comes to meeting time goals, I just like for it to be communicated to me if somebody can't meet that initial expectation. For me, it's not a matter of this has to be done by X date, but if this is done by X date, then we can move forward with the rest of the project. So
Yeah.
I just like for there to be communication so that I can adapt accordingly. And then another thing that does bother me a little bit is when we're kind of coming up with an idea, or iterating on something, and we're not taking into account multiple perspectives. So
Yeah.
this can end up being harmful later on because we might need to backtrack, right? Because we've done this ideating, we've kind of thought things through, and then we're like, oh, so and so hasn't weighed in. We should get their perspective before moving forward. And I'm like, maybe we should have gotten so and so's opinion earlier on, right?
Yeah.
So that they could have given more of their initial impressions. But in terms of how I deal with these things, I think one thing, especially with the first point about communication around time goals, is just advocating for myself and asking for communication around those time goals, because people don't know what they don't know, and if they don't know that that's something that's important to me, then how can I expect them to fulfill that need? When it comes to putting those timelines together, to begin with, I think it's good to allot some wiggle room, uh, so that there aren't hard deadlines, driving the project. Sometimes there do have to be hard deadlines, right? I mean, depending on, what it is. I mean, if it's business critical and everything, then yeah, sure, hard deadlines should probably be incorporated into the planning process, but maybe just putting hard deadlines on the most important components and not stressing over those small ones. I think a part of like, you know, project planning really is just like prioritizing and figuring out,
Yeah.
what are the things that absolutely need to be done, and then what are some things that we can, have some leeway, have some flexibility with.
One quick thing, and I'll
Sure.
let you continue. I'm one of those people. Remember, our tilts are polar opposite. So
Mhm.
I'm one of those people that can be a little lax with time and deadlines. But over the years, one of the things that I've learned is you need deadlines. And in fact, you need hard deadlines sometimes, or you'll never get anything done. And so to me, the value of having someone once again that's your polar opposite is they bring an ability that helps you succeed as well. Because you know just because something is a part of our personality, sometimes we have to overcome our personality to succeed. And so, let me go ahead and say thank you so much, Sarah, for keeping this on schedule, because I probably would just let it slip, and it would be November before the first episode or second episode goes out. But secondly, I'd like to say, even though these are things where Sarah is communicating that she advocates for herself, I think as individuals, we all have to. This is part of that compromise where we all have to say, what's the value of this? Because I think both of these things are quite valuable, at least to me, even though I'm not, my personality doesn't tilt toward that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to what we discussed in the previous episode about, the importance of diversity of perspectives, right? And just being able to understand that the things that are of utmost importance in my head might not necessarily be of utmost importance in your head. And just being able to kind of accommodate those different personalities. So yeah, kind of just back to how I, deal with these things that tend to bug me. When it comes to taking multiple perspectives into account, I think I have to consider, what's within my control and how can I be helpful, even if certain pieces aren't necessarily there. I think it's a matter of being adaptable and just understanding that, even though the structure tilt is very much driven by a desire for control, I mean, realistically, that's not always going to be the case. I'm not always going to be able to, um, have autonomy over every aspect of a project, or of a, especially when it's in a group, right? Also advocating for others is important, too, because I can suggest teams or people who can or should be involved, in the decision making process, and I think that helps not only with efficiency but then also with making other people feel included.
Yeah. And one of the things about including others, it's, at work. A lot of our context is at work, but even in your personal life, like, um, if you're planning an event, um, that is, you know, going to impact others, at least let them know. Not saying ask permission, even though you might need to. I think that's another important thing is involving the people that are going to be impacted. So
Yeah,
I like it.
definitely. All right. Well, we kind of talked about the things that bug us. I think we can kind of shift the conversation toward things that make things easier for us at work. So, would just love to kind of sing the praises of folks who have just helped us feel supported and heard in a professional setting.
Well, speaking of humans influencing each other, when you said advocating for yourself, basically communicating what your expectations are, that's one of my big ones right there. When others communicate their expectations up front, when we're starting a project or a meeting or whatever, it helps to know what do you expect either to get out of it individually, or what will we all get out of it, or what is the deliverable here? What do you want to happen? So communicating that um, up front is very helpful to me because it is a little frustrating to just be doing something and not have any direction.
Sure. Okay, so for me, I would say that uh, my mind is oriented toward execution a lot of the time. So maybe I forget about the importance of, just taking a step back and, considering maybe the more interpersonal components of my work.
Yeah.
And so something that I've communicated to somebody within my leadership that I really appreciate them doing is when they prepare me to work with new people, especially as it relates to their personalities, right? So, um, when I'm, let's say I'm getting started on a project with somebody new on another team that I've never collaborated with before, I really appreciate it when this person tells me, hey, this person has their communication style or their preferences are, such and such. And so it might be helpful to, approach them in a certain way. I personally really appreciate that. The person who I'm referring to, like, she tilts toward connection as well, just like you do, Abraham. I think that's really helpful. So I've come to really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's really good. I think kind of as we summarize this, I think one of the themes that we're seeing is, uh, you know, we all are working together. There's this social, communal aspect to working, and to just being, as I always say, human. Um, and so, as we talked about in the last episode, we talked about knowing yourself, and knowing yourself means kind of being intentional about, you know some things about you, figuring those things out, using something like the tilt. But for this episode, knowing others requires that you listen to them. It requires that you pay attention. Really short story. I remember being rewarded with it was called a reward by one of my managers years and years ago with country western tickets. Well, I just really didn't want to go to a country western concert, so it didn't feel like a reward. That leader was not paying attention to me. They didn't know me, and I think that it's beneficial, no matter which direction you tilt, what your personality type is. You got to deal with people, and you need to listen and learn from people. And I think when you uh, listen to them, and when you learn about who they are, you know how to support them, and then you can shift your mindset from just selfishness to community. So, yeah.
Sure. Sure. And I think, in general, people like that feeling of being heard. They like being, they like feeling like somebody's listening and, somebody asking them for their perspectives. It can go a really long way.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
All righty. Well, this was a great discussion. Thank you, Abraham. And thank you to everybody listening for, just again, your continued support. If you would like to tune in for future episodes, just like this one, it'll be hosted on YouTube and Spotify, and then we'll be sure to share via LinkedIn as well. Thanks again, and hope you all have a great day.
See you later.
Take care.